So as a note here, conversion is not proof that you were wrong and now this is the right way. Conversion is the change from wanting the alternative to this, what I hope is the right way. I am bought by my inner desire. I am captivated by this alternative view. I want to believe this, whereas I didn't before. Now, it's all going to fade pretty fast if as a consequence of this change, I find all sorts of chaos and ruin and unhappiness follows. It will start to persuade me that perhaps something's wrong and I've got it wrong. But if on the other hand, I get signs and wonders following, and my sign and wonder was, I was even happier than I was before. I came because of joy, but now my joy has gone through the roof. I feel a peace. I feel a hope, a comfort, and as I then proceed then through the next N months or years, do I find this reward is still there? Or do I find I'm back to, for argument's sake, say much the same as living before? And really, you see, this is the valid criteria. It's not reason. The intellectual, because he's an intellectual, assumed that the answer was intellectual. I explain to you the truth, and logically you receive it, and therefore you're converted. But that's like the plumber saying that your problem's possibly a plumbing problem, because I'm a plumber and that's the way I see things. I'm an intellectual and that's the way I see things. I'm a theologian. I'm the bishop's right-hand think tank, whatever it is, you see. So I think, proof is the answer. We bet about proving this doctrine. And we attach it to Scripture, and then we mine the Scripture and reinterpret it to make sure it fits and adjust our view a little, because the Scripture won't allow us to do that, and therefore it must be something else, or we need another explanation and theological, and so it goes on and on and on, you see. But the truth of the matter is, we are in a world of uncertainty, and you can make your proofs till you're blue in the face. You still don't know you're right. And we are material beings. And if I find that the consequence of following your truth results in chaos, war and division and strife and unhappiness and, all the bads that I had before, I'm going to look around for something better. That's the reality. You see, our faith is not based on reason. We might use reason to justify our faith, but our faith ultimately is chosen from our experience. Now, if I give you an experience of being and of knowing me, and I'm a wonderful Christian friend, faithful and true, and a joy to be with and a great blessing, well, that's incredibly persuasive on you, especially if, you've had bad experiences today and somehow I seem to shine through. Like in Gladys Aylward, the Mandarin, it's a time of war and everything's changing anyway, and he declares publicly in front of all the village, all the village that's left, I want to become a Christian. And it sort of brings tears to my eyes, being an earnest, godly person. And so it should, etc., etc. But do you see? And he says in his confession that he's so persuaded by the incredible witness of good that Gladys has been and is. And of course, because of the war, revolution situation and so forth, he's in a position where he can choose this because his world's collapsing anyway. Everyone's world is collapsing in war, in a sense, you know. And of course you can turn it round now. You can support this with reason, and I will, being an intellectual, as I pride myself. This is what would count with God. Because simple people aren't even have the option of reasoning, remotely as good as God. They're not necessarily right when they've reasoned the thing out. And they know it. And they're not going to trust their reasoning. You might, as an intellectual that thinks, that it's the next best thing to, whatever. Do you see? They know that reasoning is very suspect. It doesn't work. It has come across all sorts of people who have proved they were right and were found to result in the most awful consequences. It wasn't right after all. Because things are judged by their consequences. And in a sense, the Christian faith says that it should be too. By their fruits you will know them. Well, perhaps not entirely the Christian faith believes this, but certainly the Jesus teaching says that, certainly. Excuse the word certain. But anyway, the Christian teaching seems definitely to say this. Okay, so I've argued myself out of a job, but I haven't. Fortunately, I can still keep myself in employment as master of reason and logic on the subject. Reason seems to come up with a very good explanation, a bit like theology generally, of course, that this is what is valid. Because we don't want a God that only saves the brilliant logician. On the contrary, well, almost on the contrary, we want God to rescue everybody, ideally. Right, well, everybody's living, so they can all experience whether the results of something are good or bad from their point of view. Now, if you actually think of, the Old Testament as literal history, wiping out everyone in the world, every animal and so on, except for those that the 8 people have rescued that are surviving, is not a good outcome. It has to be explained as a good outcome in something that's not material in some sort of spiritual way. And of course the Gnostic does exactly that. He says, no, it's not about history, it's about this battle that goes on in you when you start to clear things out that you've owned as your family, and anger and revenge and vendetta and evil intent, and it's all got to go. It's all got to go. Anything that's not in harmony with your new noble purpose of godliness, it's got to go. And it's a ruthless battle that proceeds. Ruthless in that sense, in the reality of warfare, and there's all sorts of compromise with the enemy. But in fact, the Old Testament view of compromising with the other Canaanite tribes around didn't always turn out at all good, didn't look like a good idea at all. Locked you into all sorts of problems further down the line in their history. But that's if it's a history, and it's not. It's so riddled with miracles that are so unacceptable to most worldlings. It's not meant to be, and it's not going to be read as a history. It's going to be read as, at best, spiritual guidance. And you're much better concentrating on it as spiritual guidance than as some undisputable history of a chosen people. May have been very useful to have used it in that way, and possibly the very reason for the story surviving, in that the state found it very convenient to keep the Torah from once it was written onwards, which probably was not ancient times, but more like, I don't know, was it Hezekiah 600 BC or something like that, whatever it was. So we've come, I think, by, well, some sort of reasoning, some sort of assurance, some sort of conviction we have that if there are good outcomes, that really is virtually some sort of proof that this is the way to go. And if, on the other hand, the outcomes are chaos and war and catastrophe, and we think, well, it doesn't look as though God's quite with us on this, perhaps we've got things wrong, could we have a rethink? Not should we hang on to this view for the next 2,000 years and prove that it's utterly wrong, you know? We never, that's the real intellectual contribution to living, which is what Socrates finally realized he had mastered inadvertently, in that it was his uncertainty, his conviction that things are not certain, that was the strength in his arguments always, that was the power and somehow the blessing in his reasoning, lay in this belief, if you like, that he had, that he wasn't really sure of anything, not certain. And of course, if the fundamentalist had been armed with this quality, then we wouldn't have had the inappropriate denominations that we've had, and that we still have to some extent. It's not faithfulness to a fundamentalism that's going to rescue us. It's loving God and seeing his blessings accordingly. And if you know your numbers are shrinking, I was going to say stinking by mistake. It's unfortunate for you, isn't it? If the character of your members is really quite abominable at times, if you know you're a scandal publicly, and validly so, well, doesn't say much for your fundamentalism, does it? The true test is that if fewer and fewer of you are found to be right, and in the end you're alone, you've probably got it wrong. It could be you're the only true and valid, courageous fighter for the Lord, but it's much, much more likely that you've just got it wrong. Certainly the view of the rest, if anything was certain. Actually, they're not even interested once you become a minority group, unless you're actually a trouble to them.